Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to walk you through how to set up your Raspberry Pi for the first time. So if you just are pulling it out of the box, this video is going to walk you through how to install the operating system and get it all set up. So the first thing you need is the operating system for the Raspberry Pi. So if you go to Raspberry Pi downloads, if you just search this, you'll see a page like this. Many different operating systems can go on the Raspberry Pi. It's just a computer, so theoretically, you can put a lot of different things on it. Generally speaking, people either use Noobs, which is basically the Raspbian operating system with some extra stuff, or you can just put Raspbian because it has just it's a little smaller. So we're just going to go with that one. As you see, there's three options. We have desktop with recommended software, desktop, and then just light, which has just the command line interface and nothing else. So if you're unfamiliar with Linux, this might be a little difficult to use. So we're just going to go with the desktop. So we have a desktop environment if we want. So just download the zip. I already have it downloaded. So it comes in a zip. You can just unzip it and you should get something like this. You should have a .img file. And so this is a disk image file. So what we need to do is actually write this file to our SD card. And so there's a couple different tools to do this. I use one called Balena Etcher. Oops. So it just says it flashes OS images to SD cards and USB drives. It's available for Windows and Mac. A lot of people use it. There might be other ones, so look around if this one isn't working for you. But all you have to do is open it up. And so you would just select your card. It already auto-selected this one for me. And you would just select your image, this .img, and open it and flash. I already actually have mine flashed. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do it, so I didn't want to put that in the video. So you would just click flash and it would do it for you. So really simple there. So I'm going to exit out of that. So now that you have your card flashed, you should see it in your File Explorer, something like this. You'll actually see two drives. So you'll see on my computer right now, that's D and E. It's actually the same SD card. It was just partitioned into two slices. So in this boot partition, this is everything you need to boot into the Raspberry Pi and start things up. And the removable disk is just an unused section. So with this SD card, you could actually eject it, plug it in your Raspberry Pi, and you're good to go. One thing I am going to show in this video is how to do a headless start. Headless means not using a monitor. So with the Raspberry Pi, you know there is some inputs. We have micro HDMI inputs, so we could put in the power, put in our SD card, put in some, like a mouse and a keyboard, and then plug into a monitor. And then just use it like a normal computer. So this is obviously really easy to use if you have all that stuff, but you might not have a HDMI monitor or the adapter line around your house. Maybe you don't have an extra keyboard, which would make this kind of difficult. So what I'm going to show right now is how to do a headless start. We're going to tell the Raspberry Pi to allow us to access it without any connection, just through wireless. And then we'll also tell it, give it some files that will allow it to connect to the Wi-Fi so that we can find it wirelessly. So what you should do, open up some folder somewhere. You don't want to do this on the actual SD card because sometimes you can run into permission errors. So in just some folder somewhere, it doesn't matter where, make just a new file, which is called SSH, and remove the file extension. So it's going to give you this warning, don't worry. So I have this blank file named SSH. There's nothing in it. We are going to drop that over onto here. So now we have this file, SSH. When Raspberry Pi starts up, it's going to see this file, and it's going to tell it to allow SSH. If you've never heard of SSH, look it up on Wikipedia real quick. Basically, it's just a way to control a computer remotely through the command line. So we have that, that's going to be good, but we're not going to be able to access it through SSH unless the Raspberry Pi is connected to the Wi-Fi. So let me just, sorry. Yeah, we're just going to open Notepad++. Okay, so here's an example. I just had to have that so I didn't have to write it out again. Well, I'll just copy back in. But basically, this is going to tell the Raspberry Pi to connect to the wireless. You need to tell it the country, so I'm sure most people it'll be US. And for this network is where we can define our Wi-Fi network. So for example, if I'm at home, I would do my router and my password. Obviously, that's not my real one. That won't work. And then you're going to save this as wpa_supplicant.conf. So this one actually has my actual Wi-Fi, so that's why I'm not opening it, but just so you can see what it's going to look like. If you look up this wpa_supplicant.conf online, you should be able to find something like this. So if you don't want to type it out, you can just copy it from the internet somewhere. But you would just put in your router and your password. So one thing that I'm actually still working on is trying to make this work on BYU campus. If you know, BYU has BYU, I think it's just called BYU Wi-Fi or something like that. The issue is, if you ever use the Open Wi-Fi, you know that once you go to the browser, you have to select some option that says, let me use this internet as a guest or something. And so it requires some sort of interaction. So if we give this command to Raspberry Pi, it's not going to be able to do it on its own. The other network is Eduroam or whatever. And this one requires a username and a password. And so because it uses a different kind of authentication style, I haven't been able to figure it out yet. Maybe I will figure it out later, so I will let you know if I do. But right now, this whole headless example might only be applicable to people who are doing this at home, in which case they can provide their own network router name and their password. So once you have that all figured out, save it exactly named this, and we're just going to copy this over to our boot partition. So we have SSH and our Wi-Fi configuration. So now that we have that, we're going to eject it. So it's not there anymore. So right now, I am pulling the SD card out of my computer. I am slipping it into the bottom of the Raspberry Pi. And I'm getting the power supply and plugging it in. So I have the lights flashing on the Raspberry Pi telling me that it's turning on. Because it is headless, I don't have anything attached to it except for the power supply. There's no monitor, no mouse, no keyboard. So that's going to turn on. We're not going to be able to actually see what's going on because we have no output, no monitor or anything. And that is good for there. But next step is we actually have to SSH into this Raspberry Pi to do something with it. If you're not familiar with SSH at all, it requires an IP, which we might not know because we just plugged it in and the router is going to give it the IP. So on Windows, I just did ipconfig. For Mac, it'd be ifconfig and it would look a little different. But basically, this tells me that my laptop has this IP, and this is my router's IP. So depending on your situation, there might be a couple different ways to find the IP of your Raspberry Pi. Some people can just take this router IP and just go to their internet and just plug it in right there. And this would give you your router settings. And then you could you'd have to type in your password sometimes, but you would go to maybe like a device menu and it would show you all the devices on the network and it would show you your IP. My house uses this Google Wi-Fi thing, which is actually kind of difficult to work with. So I can't do it through there. Instead, I used a tool called Advanced IP Scanner. I'm not sure if this is available on Mac, but there's a lot of different options. So you can find something like that. But I'm just going to start that up. And if you saw right here, my router is 168.86.1, and my address is 40, so it's probably somewhere between this range, between 1 and 255. So I'm going to scan that range and see if we can find the Raspberry Pi on there. So you can see there's a lot of different things going on in the network. We have some Amazon Echoes. Here's like the router. This 40 is my computer. There's someone's Mac. There's an iPad. But right here we have Raspberry Pi. Maybe you notice there's another Raspberry Pi down here. That's actually another one I have running. So I'm pretty sure it's this one because I recognize that IP. So we know the IP. It's 192.168.86.30. We can test the connection by using the ping utility. So 168.30. And so it's pinging with some little packets, and it looks like it's connected, so we're good. So next step, we're going to SSH into the Raspberry Pi. So I'm going to do SSH Pi, so that's the username, .86.30. So now it's saying for the username Pi at this computer, what is the password? So the default user is Pi, and the default password is Raspberry, which makes things easy. So I just typed in Raspberry, and look at that. We are in the computer. So even though we have no connections, we're just connected over Wi-Fi to this computer. We can run commands like ls. We can do change directory into the desktop. Looks like nothing's in the desktop. We can do stupid things like that, but we're here. So that's pretty cool. Hopefully later on in the semester you'll get more familiar with using this command line environment and you'd be comfortable here. But if you're not, you might want to be using more of a GUI environment like what I have right here on my Windows, where I can click on stuff and I can like do menus and whatnot. So to do that, we're going to use something called VNC, which stands for Virtual Network Computing. So what we want to do to enable that is do sudo raspberry, or not raspberry, rasp config. So sudo just says run this command as the administrator, and rasp-config is a little command that's special for Raspbian operating system. So we're just going to hit enter, and we get this almost like a GUI, but it's just options. I'm just going to use my arrow keys to move around. I'm going to go to interface options, down here to VNC. Would you like to enable the VNC server? I'll say yes by clicking enter. Okay. One thing that I've learned when playing around with this is because we haven't connected a monitor to the Raspberry Pi yet, it actually doesn't know how to display things. So you might get an error later on. So just to be safe, we're going to do advanced options, resolution, and we're just going to change it from the default. If yours might be set at the default, we're just going to change this. So either way, it might look a little funky, so it doesn't matter too much as long as it's not default. Okay, so now we're good. If I hit the right arrow, now I get down to these other options. So I'm just going to hit finish. Sometimes when you do make changes to this, it's safe to reboot it. So I'm just going to do sudo reboot. And so because it's rebooting, it's turning off the computer, and I got kicked out of the Raspberry Pi. You can see now I'm back here on my Windows computer. So let's just give that a second to reboot. It doesn't take that long. We'll get our ping ready just to be prepared. Let's try it. Nope, I thought it would be done quicker than it was. Looks like the request timed out. So I'll give it another second or two. Oh, looks like we're getting something back. Try it again to double check. Okay, cool. So our connection is set up again. If we wanted, we could SSH, but I'm not going to. I'm going to cancel out of that. We're going to use the VNC we just set up. So if you were looking at the menu closely, you saw we said enable the VNC server. So that means there's a VNC server running on the Raspberry Pi. To connect to it, we need a VNC client. So one I've used before is just called Real VNC. They're not too different. Other VNCs, just look up VNC client, you can find one. So you can just download a VNC viewer. It's really easy to use. I already have mine downloaded, so I'm going to open that up. You can see I've already been playing around with it, but we can just delete this. So if we wanted to connect to a VNC server, we just type in the IP, which we know is 86.30. It's going to ask for a username, which is pi, and the password, which is raspberry. Okay, and just like that, we're connected. So this is what I kind of mentioned, the resolution might be a little funny. It actually might be better just to keep it in this little window. We can make it a little bigger. That's not bad. But you see we have this VNC up in the corner that's saying the VNC server is running. And this is our desktop. It might look a little different than Windows or Mac, obviously, but has the same basic features. Here's our terminal that we can run our commands in. So we can do ifconfig, and look, that's the IP we're using, so that's cool. We have our folders. We can come here and look at our tools and do whatever we might need to do here. So those are just two options for connecting to your Raspberry Pi in headless mode. As you can tell, we didn't have to use an external monitor or a mouse or a keyboard or anything. We just gave it the Wi-Fi file and told it to enable SSH, which allowed us to SSH in and enable VNC. So like I said, we're still trying to figure out how to make this work on BYU campus. It might not be possible because the network is pretty strict. But hopefully if you're at home and you want to mess around with something, you can do it this way and get around using a monitor and everything. Anyway, that's it for this video. Reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks.